decades ago, there was a cultural revolution. Women who had been relegated to essentially being either homemakers or secretaries said no more. A new generation started entering the workforce, and we began to see increasing equality in the workplace. That rapid march towards gender equality that ensued in the 70s and 80s made full equality seem inevitable. Progress slowed, however, in the 90s, and in the past decade, positive movement seems to have completely stalled. Case in point, in 2001, women earned 76% of what men earned in a comparable profession. 10 years later, that number has jumped a whole 1 percentage point to 77%. Oh. Our next guest is a professor of sociology at the University of Maryland. He just published a new study entitled "The Persistence of Workplace Gender Segregation in the U.S." and is here to talk about how we can get that equality train moving again. Philip Cohen joins us now. Thanks for being with us.
Hi, thanks for having me.
So to start with, let's look at the problem. Why have we seen progress in terms of gender segregation in the workforce, men and women working in different professions? Why has that progress stalled?
Well, I think we have to realize that rather than there being something actively stopping progress, it's more that the sources of progress that we had in the 70s and 80s kind of dried up. That includes the big growth of the industries that were pulling women into the labor force, like education and the service sector. Those are still growing, but they're not growing so fast relative to other parts of the economy. That really pulled women in. The growth of women's presence in education and higher education increased meteorically in the 70s and 80s and plateaued sometime in the 90s. Depending on which measure you look at. And then we really saw a strong pattern of women entering men's occupations, especially in middle-class jobs, those women college graduates, but not so much movement the other way. So women were entering professions like law and medicine or realty or educational administration that had been previously male jobs, but men weren't going into nursing and teaching preschool and elementary school.
Right, and let's actually look at some of those. Let's look at some of those numbers, because that is such a shocking part of your study. 1 in 4 men actually work in fields, you report, that are dominated of 90% by males, a gender segregated workplace. 1 in 3 women work in fields that have 80% of women in the workplace. So your study really tells a story of a professional environment in the United States where huge portions of our working public are in a one-gender office.
Yes, office might not be the word for it, because a lot of that is construction and carpentry and plumbing and all that. Yes. It really is the case that our worlds at home are much more integrated than our worlds at work. And this is more strongly for the less educated workforce. So those blue-collar jobs have been much slower to integrate, both the male-dominated ones like construction and the female-dominated ones like nursing assistants, for example, still about 3/4 female. And this wouldn't be so bad if people were just freely choosing any job they wanted and they had different preferences. But the fact also is that the female-dominated occupations pay less, even when we can make comparisons that are really as apples to apples as we can get. Same skills, same level of training and commitment. And we find that the male-dominated jobs are paying more.
And you really can't have this conversation without acknowledging what you just did, the stereotypes that still exist with a number of jobs, jobs that women just don't want to do, jobs that men just don't want to do. And it reminds me of a scene in Meet the Parents. Let's take a look.
Will you stop making fun of me for being a nurse?
Could you at least try maybe to consider another profession?
Jack, yes or no?
Ever?
No.
Okay, yes.
And you look at the makeup of the nursing industry, and this movie is actually not at all exaggerating. You have 10% of the makeup are men, 90% are female, and this is one of the things that you've talked about that can help us lead to a workplace equality. What needs to change, though?
Well, a lot of people talked about the growth of men in nursing over the last decade, and on a proportion basis, it was pretty dramatic. Nursing was 92% female 10 years ago. Now it's only 90% female, but that's not a very satisfactory rate of change. Right. Well, what has to change is there's a strong stigma still for female-dominated work, just like there is for other things that are strongly associated with women. I mean, we have two genders, but they're not they're not just different. There's inequality there. So it's not surprising that men don't want to move into what's seen as an inferior role. But I think, and I've been trying to make the case recently, that we could, by doing a better job of integrating work and family, by getting fathers more involved in parenting their own children and doing housework and childcare at home, having workplaces where they expect fathers to do that, I think that could begin to break down some of those assumptions and norms about what it is that is the proper or appropriate for men and women to do.
That will indeed begin to break down some of those barriers, but as a father, I can tell you it is impossible for the man to do more than 50% of his share. It just doesn't work the way that the mother-child bond goes. But we have to make it easier for women to be careerists and mothers at the same time. You talk about the need for expanding childcare and paid leave as ways that we can help end some of the gender inequality that we see.
And I think it's really about increasing the choices and options that people have in putting together a career and a family together. And when the options are there for both men and women, I think it's when we have the potential to start changing things. And, you know, and most of the industrialized world is pretty shocked to look at. It's not just our healthcare, which I know you spend a lot of time talking about, but, you know, our kids are not going to school at the younger ages that they are in most of Europe, where our vacations are less, our family leave, and so on and on. Right. So there's a lot more we can do to support the work-family integration that I think is going to help break down some of these gender barriers as well.
Yeah, it's an area where we're really lagging behind. Philip Cohen, thank you so much.
No, thank you.
And up next, battle of the tech titans Apple and Android. Our phones will never be the same.